Our second reading is going to come from Genesis, chapter 45, 3 through 11 and 15. It takes a bit of explanation of why I'm going back to the Old Testament again, if you'll bear with me. This is what does it say? The seventh Sunday of Epiphany. Now, it's not every year that we get a seventh and eighth Sunday of Epiphany, but because Easter is late this year, we get a couple extra weeks. Now, for those of us who like to follow the Revised Common Lectionary, the text that we have here today only shows up about every once in a decade or so. So I want to take the opportunity to jump on and talk about the story of Joseph and his brothers coming out of the book of Genesis. And we're going to take just a snippet, and then I'll come back and explain a little bit more of the story, or remind you maybe more of the story. Genesis chapter 45. Joseph said to his brothers, Joseph is in Egypt by this point. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him. So dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come closer to me. And they came closer, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father of Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, and so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And he kissed his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked to him. Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So we are reading just a snippet from the climatic ending of the long story of Joseph, son of Jacob. It runs from Genesis chapter 37 to Genesis chapter 50. You can thank me later for not reading the whole story to you. This short text we read functions as a lens, though, through which we can view the whole story of deception, betrayal, heartbreak, reversal, and final reconciliation. That lens can allow us to look at the story at multiple perspectives and multiple scales. That of a single life, like Joseph, but also the story of a single family, as the story of an entire family, multi-generational line, as the story of Israel, of God's chosen people. And if we are open to it, we may also allow us to look through the lens at our own current day individual and collective experience. It seems inappropriate to pull this short segment out without at least summarizing for you or reminding you the rest of the story. It is a story with a lot of family issues and intrigue. In brief, Joseph is in Egypt because his older brothers got together and turned on him and sold him into slavery. They also deceived their father by letting him think Joseph was killed by wild animals. Their act, while deceitful, is not entirely incomprehensible. given what appears to be a certain arrogance on their little brother's part. Joseph, youngest of many brothers, was loved by his father more than any other sibling because he was the son of Jacob's old age. He had a favored status among the family, and he shared his infamous dreams that invariably signified his superiority vis-a-vis his brothers and his parents. Joseph, although gifted, it would seem to have a lot to learn about getting along with family and others. Ending up as a slave in Egypt, Joseph does seem to have learned a lot along the way, maybe grown up a bit. In Egypt, Joseph experiences great success, working himself up from a slave to head of Potiphar's house. Now, Potiphar was the captain of the Egyptian king's guard, so a high-ranking official. Joseph experiences a crushing turn of events, though, ending up in prison after he refuses the advances of Potiphar's wife, and she lies about the incident. Even in prison, Joseph's abilities are recognized, and he again secures a supervisory position under the jailer. We can recognize that what Joseph would seem to be learning is a good deal of patience, virtue, and prudence. He is exceptional, but not on his own. God is everywhere and always involved. This is explicit in every major step in the Genesis story of Joseph. At each junction, we learn from the narrator, the Lord was with Joseph. This declaration typically precedes all the comments about Joseph's success. Even the outsiders like Potiphar and the Pharaoh are somehow aware of God's presence with Joseph, and Joseph knows it too. After he proves successful as a dream interpreter and has a chance to get out of prison by interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh himself, this second time only to Pharaoh is the second time he succeeds in moving into supervision, now under Pharaoh. Now that Joseph is well positioned after many years of separation, the story circles back to his family of origin. The famine Joseph has predicted hit not only Egypt, but also hits his father Jacob and family back in Israel. The same brothers who sold Joseph into slavery are now forced to go hat in hand to Egypt to buy food. Of course, as luck would have it, they just happen to have to run into Joseph. Now, Joseph recognizes them, but the inverse is not true. They do not appear to recognize this person that they are forced to bow down to, even though it's exactly as the dreams had predicted long in the past. However, now Joseph's mettle will be tested as never before. He has gotten to this high position by being wise and virtuous with others. But what about how he will treat his own family? Family whom he has not seen in years, family who has obviously done him wrong. We can recognize that sometimes family can bring out either the best or the worst in us. Perhaps we are not surprised when Joseph speaks, quote, harshly to his brothers. Then, for 3 long chapters, they make trips back and forth from Israel to Egypt to buy more grain. They negotiate around Joseph's stipulation that they must leave the youngest brother as a slave to him. Here you can hear the echo of the original story. Joseph, it seems, is taking his sweet time extracting some sweet revenge. Or is it revenge? What Joseph puts his brothers through could be seen as a regression from wisdom and virtue that he had learned and displayed since being sold into slavery, regressing back into revenge. However, a more generous alternative is possible. Another option is that perhaps the now wiser Joseph is testing his brothers to see if they too have changed. Have they perhaps also gained virtue and wisdom over the years? Stepping back, perhaps even the powerful Joseph must work through the complex feelings he has after his brother's original profound betrayal of him. He may be struggling with his new learned virtues as he tries to surmount the mountain of historic family treachery. In his life journey, Joseph has seen and passed serious tests of his character, but the path of Genesis' story suggests that this moment with family will be the most difficult of all. Now we're up to where our reading came from today, on Genesis 45. What makes these verses so profound is that both Joseph and his brothers step up to pass that final test. Moved by brother Judah's appeal to save younger brother Benjamin, Joseph cannot contain himself any longer. He dismisses the other people around them, all but his brothers. Then he bursts into tears, reveals himself to his brother, and immediately asks about the health of his father. Now, various translations try to describe the reactions of the brothers. One of them says terrified. One of them says confused. Our NRSV says dismayed. I'm going to contend that they all may be correct at that point in time. Joseph tries again to reveal himself as your brother Joseph, to which he adds a contentious detail that only he would know, whom you sold into Egypt. But he does not leave it there just as an accusation. He confronts the brothers by making a stunning theological claim. It is not earthly brothers who sold Joseph out of spite. It was God who sent him to save lives. Because of its importance and because the brothers surely cannot believe their ears, he repeats it twice more. We, with the brothers, must ask the question, how could all that happen to Joseph be God's will, God's doing, and why? And now what do we do? These questions about God's will and God's actions are profound and should not be answered too quickly. We should take a moment to think about the questions and not move to conclusion too fast. What we can observe from the text is for certain that Joseph is the one making the claim about God. It is not the narrator, third-person view, not like the narrator observing for us God's being with and directing Joseph. It's Joseph's own first-person voice. The two voices, the narrator and Joseph, are not in conflict, but one should not miss that there is a difference. Shouldn't miss that first, Joseph lacks the knowledge of God's ways that the narrator clearly possesses. And second, Joseph lacks the authority to speak for God. He is not a prophet. However, at this climatic moment, Joseph's testimony does align with the narrator's testimony. Aligns just like when he told Pharaoh, it's not I, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Perhaps this is another reason why he repeats his theological assertion 3 times, not only to reassure and convince his brothers, but to reassure and convince himself. He says, it has been God's will. It is pointed out to us in this story that forgiveness is never easy, especially for those closest to us whose betrayal is most painful. Family can bring out the worst in us and also the best in us, though the best rarely comes as easily. This dynamic is especially true if the tables are turned, if the offended ones now have power and opportunity to extract revenge. It is never easy when our forgiveness is sought, even if we exercise that power by withholding our forgiveness. Joseph of our story is, of course, now wise, and Joseph forgives. But given the full story, we know this was not easy for him or his brothers. His brothers continue to worry and need time, and Joseph repeated reassurance even after the death of their father. Reconciliation is not an instantaneous process occurring just because it was declared a good thing in one set of verses of the Bible. It is a process that takes time, days, maybe even years. The one tasked with forgiveness will need virtue and prudence, often hard won, and a good dose of divine assistance, just like Joseph. Those in need of forgiveness may also have to prove their worth, their virtue, and their good intents, just like Joseph's brothers. Nevertheless, with God's guidance, reconciliation can happen. The Joseph story of Genesis models reconciliation can happen on the scale of family, community, and within and across nations. Joseph's story reminds us one totally crucial way that one forgives and loves one's enemies, who sometimes may be even family members, is not by retaliating against them. It is by reconciliation that we forgive and love. Joseph's story also reminds us of the crucial role those in need of forgiveness play in true reconciliation. And finally, Joseph's story reminds us God's divine love is always with us, transcends and conquers all when we surrender our own egocentricity and grow in the love of God. Amen.